Hello and welcome to another episode of Earth911's Sustainability in Your Ear. And we're back with another interview, this time about how university researchers support public debate with accurate information and also help organize community action. Our guests, Daniel O'Connell and Scott Peters' book, In the Struggle, is a chronicle of the decline of the traditional small farm in California's Central Valley. Under the onslaught of industrial agribusiness, which manipulated provisions of several landmark federal laws that were actually meant to protect small farms, those farmers, farm workers, and a cadre of university social researchers forged a resistance that attempted to preserve democratic agrarian communities against loss of income and political power. And in the struggle is also a narrative reflection on the process and purpose of sociological research, featuring the stories of 8 prominent ethnographic and community development professionals who worked in the region over the past 100 years. They expose lessons and tools that are valuable in the battle to solve today's climate crisis equitably, amongst many other good insights. And we've got a lot to talk about with Daniel O'Connell, who is the executive director of the Central Valley Partnership, a network of labor, environmental, and community groups, and Scott Peters, who is a professor of global development at Cornell University. Welcome to the show, gentlemen. How are you today?
Wonderful to be here.
Great to be here. Thanks for inviting us.
Well, we're pleased to have you here. Let me just start by, could you summarize, and I know this is a big question with not a lot of time to answer, what has happened to the Central Valley in the last 120 years?
This is Dan. I'll go first. You know, the Central Valley and California agriculture weren't settled in the same patterns as the rest of the United States. And Paul Taylor saw that discontinuity as he came out here from the Midwest. So the region is originally Spanish and Mexican colonialism, the Treaty of Guadalupe Hidalgo, and you see that the granting of large land grants, Spanish Mexican land grants at that moment was already situating an unequal ownership of land. Mm-hmm. The state comes in to the United States. It was a very reactionary place. There was codified laws that basically were looking towards genocide that they were paying for body parts of Native Americans. And this was under law to be brought in so they were actively exterminating people. And then this importation of folks over time. This consolidation of this narrative of the Valley, though, is also right after the state comes into the Union. There's a series of droughts in the 1870s and 1890s and a series of pretty severe economic contractions that, again, kind of drive the smaller holders out. So unequal from the beginning and just exacerbating. And then you get the propellants of what we're going to talk about in the book in the 20th century, in the 19th century, that really propelled this consolidation of the economy and land holdings. I think Mark Arax in his recent book does a lot of work identifying who the landowners were during this period of consolidation. That's not our interest. Mm-hmm. We would much rather be looking at how to empower folks on the ground to understand this narrative and its history so that they can become activists and scholars today and really change the system, which is already underway.
Now, Scott, the other thing about this is it's the story of the researchers themselves. And I would characterize it as a tale of giants standing on the shoulders of giants, standing on the shoulders of giants. And it's giants all the way down. These people really made a huge difference. Tell us a little about them.
Sure. First of all, I'd like to say, in response to the story that you are implying about the kind of collapse of small farm holders and the kind of dominance of these big industrial farms and all the things that happened with them. That's one of the storylines that certainly runs through the book. But as Dan was just indicating, the other storyline is actually the storyline we're most interested in telling. And that's the storyline of the emergence of these powerful organizers and activists who got themselves right on the front lines of the struggle against these big forces that were damaging core values of the country. And the most core value is democracy. Mm-hmm. What's interesting about these scholars, and we highlight 8 of them, each in a separate chapter, is that fully half of these 8 scholars were not employed by universities or colleges as professional scholars or academics. So what the book does is it highlights the fact that activists who are on the front lines of very difficult battles are also engaging in this work of building knowledge from those battles and those experiences, and refining tactics and methods and tools based on what we want to call scholarship. It is the production of knowledge. It is the testing and the refining of it, bringing to bear against the struggles that people were seeing. So what's really important, I think, for us, and what was so good about the project of being able to bring these stories to light is how they help us to see where knowledge is being built, how it's being tested, how that's connected to really tough, smart activist organizing work. So this is a different storyline than the storyline that makes people all depressed. As Dan also said earlier, this storyline that we're talking about now is very energizing. It's full of possibility and promise. And we see around us today, and Dan is sitting right in the middle of the Central Valley and can speak to this directly because he's on that front line. We see around us the emergence of new people who are joining in this long relay race that went across the 20th century and now into the 21st.
Well, when I was reading this, I was really struck by the similarities between what happened in the Central Valley and the consolidation of farming, agribusiness in the Corn Belt. And that has created a great deal of alienation amongst small farmers there. What tools specifically would you say we need to put into the hands of the folks who are feeling the tremendous impact both of agribusiness and climate change in the Central Valley and in the Midwest? Where should they be thinking about starting? What's the first step to exerting real political power based on good research? Because today, good research is one of the things that's hardest to keep in front of people's attention because of so much misinformation.
Paul Taylor once said that the academic disciplines of economics and political science should have never been disassociated. They're integrally connected. If you look at Walter Goldschmidt's study of who should get water, it's really a study of economics and civic vestedness. And I think what you're looking at is the idea that you need an equitable economy, that it is a condition and an outcome of democracy. So without it, you begin to have an atrophy in the civic life of communities to be able to understand and make meaning of what's happening to them. They're under just too much stress, working 3 jobs, et cetera, et cetera. You also have a theory of economics happening here, that you want capital circulating in a local economy as many times as you can before it flies out. So the Arvin Dainuba study is showing that the small farmers around Dainuba were entrepreneurial businesses in their own right. They were purchasing and participating in the civic life of Dainuba. There was many more churches. It was an incorporated city, sidewalks, numbers of doctors, numbers of newspapers, all there. But also that the economic activity in Dainuba was twice that of the retail activity in Arvin. And so,
and let me just clarify that. So Arvin was a more agribusiness dominated community, yes, and as a result was less dynamic economically
and civically. Mm-hmm. And so I guess to come full circle to today, California, I just said, was originally a very reactionary and racist state. And the whole country still grappling with this white supremacy that we have running through our entire history.
Having grown up in the Midwest, both of my parents grew up on small farms in Illinois in the 1920s and 30s. I did my education in the 2 Midwestern institutions, University of Illinois, University of Minnesota. You ask about what tools people need in the Corn Belt to confront what they're facing. Mm-hmm. We want to say that the stories that the 8 scholars tell in this book are themselves tools, because those stories show us tactics and strategies of fighting, and in many cases winning battles against these forces. So our hope is that the book itself becomes a tool that helps awaken people's imagination, that gives them a chance to learn from the stories that teach in this book. But secondly, I think for us, what's so critically important is that the book is really about the defense of the core value of democracy and its connection to what was called in the 20th century by some people economic justice.
Mm-hmm.
These are issues of equity. These are very important issues that are core values for many folks in the Midwest and in the Corn Belt. They were born and raised thinking this is a democracy we're living in. That means a bunch of things about the dignity of ordinary people in little small places and their opportunities to live lives of satisfaction and integrity. And so I think one of the things we're hoping as we connect with farmers and with activists and with scholars in the Midwest is that this book can help open up their own lines of recovering the stories in the Midwest, because there are such stories of people who also during the 20th century and today are fighting for these values and experiencing some of the same kinds of things that people experience in California, although in a different kind of scale and way.
Well, reading through the various stories, it's clear that documenting what was happening on the ground was really the first and most important tool that they had.
Sure.
And today, of course, we can disseminate that information in a variety of ways. But let's talk about particularly what I thought was the sharpest confrontation that you documented, which was between the researcher Ernesto Galarza, who was Director of Research and Education at the National Farm Labor Union, and who was also, by the way, nominated for a Nobel Peace Prize, and the DiGiorgio Fruit Company, which became one of the most valuable companies in the United States by consolidating all these lands in the Central Valley. What did you learn, particularly from Galarza's confrontation with DiGiorgio?
So Galarza is my model in a lot of ways. I undertook this dissertation. This book is based on dissertation. Mm-hmm. And I knew, just like Galarza, that I was not going to go on to be an academic at a campus, at a university setting. I was going to come in to the San Joaquin Valley and to continue the work, but much closer to the problem. So some of the takeaways, and Galarza is really close to my heart: tenacity, courage, resolve, to be strategic and willing to sacrifice personal position to make social advance. You see over the about 10 years, but it's about 12, 13 years that he's here as a farm labor organizer, you see him, first of all, right off the bat, go into a strike against the DiGiorgio Farms, which was the farm that was around Arvin, California, which later Goldschmidt studied. So right off the bat, he punches the biggest bully in the nose, and it's gloves off and ready to go. He goes on to maybe have another 20 strikes, not only in California, he's leading strikes of farm workers. But this is in the era of the Braceros program. So the Braceros are working to erode labor organizing capacity because they're eroding the wage levels, and they're being used as strike breakers. So then he attacks that federal law and its underpinnings. And he finally has succeeded. But in the end, he's out of a job. They have succeeded in destroying his union and his position. And what's really compelling in the book is to hear him say that in 1959, he was hospitalized for 3 months for sheer exhaustion. Mm-hmm. And on December 24th, just before Christmas, 1960, he's writing his congressman looking for work. And it's so humbling to see somebody that is so tough be brought down for a moment. He's lost his job. And then he goes on to continue he doesn't continue necessarily this fight in the region, but he picks up other issues pertinent to Mexican Americans, Chicanos. So Galarza shows us the real grit that you're going to need to have to do this work.
Now, both Galarza and Paul Taylor faced McCarthyite attacks, which were organized in a different way than the cult-like approach that we have on the internet, which is, QAnon is a good example of this.
Sure.
It's a distributed misinformation campaign, particularly directed at science. So what tools do you see us needing to develop in order to respond to this more diffuse but toxic environment that we live in right now? Or is it that much different?
Before we jump into the McCarthyite thing, and I think there's a lot to talk about there, I want to punctuate something with Ernesto Gallar's, because it to me it captures the essence of the tough, powerful, rigorous spirit of all of the scholars in this book. This is a one sentence from page 113 of Ernesto Gallar's speaking about his work. What he says is, a mind placed at the forward edge of events and guided by knowledge uses the past, affects the present, and possibly helps form the future. So that is a sentence about scholarship at and on the front lines. And it's about scholarship that deeply and directly intends to shape the future. So you want to talk about McCarthyite pushback and suppression and all of that. Well, that sentence is frightening to people who don't want anybody to be guided by knowledge of the past and being on the front lines, bringing it to bear on struggles. So there's no surprise in the McCarthyite era that some of these scholars we focus on here experience this, and no surprise that today there's a new version of that.
You see in the book, it's amazing that Galarza is not attacked more along McCarthy lines. I don't know why. It's Taylor, the war hero that fought in the First World War, that does face numerous FBI investigations. He's at a university where you're having to sign loyalty oaths along with Goldschmidt to retain your position. In the end of the book, we put forward a number of axioms for politically engaged scholarship. I think they inform and answer your question, but there's a few of them that are in particular pertinent. Hold, carry, and share truth. And so this is ways to confront this kind of misinformation or these political pushback that you're going to have. Enable problems, engage problems over extended periods of time. Leverage legal precedent and public process. Produce text for varied constituencies. These are some of the we boilerplate some of these advice and from the experience of who and what the scholars experienced. It was a much rougher ride during the 40s and 50s for these folks to do their work federally in some ways, but you can see the institutional pushback that the scholars that were involved in the 60s and 70s faced as well.
But it's interesting. And by the way, my background in college was political science, and I was a journalist for a long time. And all this resonates with me because it is the same kind of effort that we try to make. I did it in technology. Now I'm doing it in sustainability. But what's different about this is that in addition to, for instance, the Hearst organization was orchestrating attacks against these researchers and the movements that they were involved in. But today you have mainstream media coordinated, you have coordinated social media attacks and so forth. It's on the one hand a lot easier to live and get around and communicate today, but the intensity of the conflict is so much greater. So how do you think that farming communities, which are by their very nature small, can respond to these very large, broad-based attacks that they face whenever they raise any issue of equity?
First of all, there's two values I think that we lift up in the book. One is democracy, and the other is the power of community. In community, and you'll see that in Isao Fujimoto's chapter, community is based on relationships. And so I think that there's opportunities, including to reinvigorate local economies in small towns, in some ways better than large towns because those relationships are so personal already. The second thing is that Scott and I don't only locate scholars in universities. And as Scott likes to say, the majority of the folks in this book are not located at universities when they're doing this work. I want to go back to three of those axioms that are really pertinent, not only for scholars, but for those community members in rural communities that are going to move forward with actions to promote democracy and an equitable economy. There's three that are really, really important. One is pressure indicates relevance. If you're facing pushback, it means you're hitting an actual strategic point that's important. And some of these are cultural fights. If you wear a mask in Kansas now, you're facing social critique. Oh, well, you should still wear the mask because there's small children and there's others that have their eyes on you. Second, pressure indicates relevance. So, persevere through adversity. And finally, expect political reaction. Pressure indicates relevance. Persevere through adversities. Those are the three that are key importance, and they can apply to any regular folk that want to create change in their community.
So if you're getting that pushback, you should consider that a validation of the fact that you're being effective.
Yes, it's a measure. That shows through the book.
That's when you need
that's one of the things the Industrial Areas Foundation always says, the Saul Alinsky organizing institution is that the real action is in the reaction. Mm-hmm. That's when you learn. That's what you learn a lot from. So a lot of actions are actually staged to provoke a reaction, so that the enemy, so to speak, reveals itself. And actually, speaking of Ernesto Galarza, he was pretty good at baiting, as Dan likes to say, baiting the enemy and getting them to overstep in their reaction.
Well, and Isao Fujimoto, who you mentioned a moment ago, had this position. He said that research should serve the community. But isn't that harder today, because academics in particular are more dependent on corporate funding than they were decades ago? Does the change in the way that we're financing education also undercut our democracy? Yeah,
so let me speak to that first quickly. I want to say first, I just want to say that what Dan is doing with his colleagues in the Central Valley Partnership is the answer to the question you just asked a minute ago. How do small places possibly stand up to these big forces? Well, they have to organize. Yep. They have to build coalitions across lines, labor union groups, environmental groups that are working on issues with immigration, with poverty, with youth. All of those have to come together. And, the only way that big money or big power can be fought is by organizing people to create power that way. So, look, this morning, I shared this with Dan. I got an email sharing with me a very fancy public document about the creation of the Bezos Earth Fund. Mm-hmm. So Jeff Bezos is going to put $10 billion on the table to fight climate change. And this showed up in my Department of Global Development because people in my department are saying we're likely to get some of this money for our work. So there is to put a very long, because this is a huge topic, so I want to just be really short about it. Over the past 100 years has been a steady decline in public funding of research. At the same time, there's been an increase of the private sector corporate funding. In agriculture, we get, research funded by Monsanto and by, these big international corporations. So there are lots of reasons to be concerned here about what are the research agendas. What kinds of things are being published? What kinds of things is that suppressing? Lots of people are really concerned about this. At the same time, what's interesting, and Dan is in California, can speak to this. A lot of these young philanthropists who have made tons of money with Google and places like that, some of them are actually supporting some of this on the ground organizing in California. So it's a complicated picture here, but and you're right to point out about the challenge. From my perspective, the last thing I'll say about this, again, the promising answer to this is organizing, because it's if the Central Valley Partnership is forging partnerships that create platforms for powerful work. Mm-hmm. And part of that work is creating knowledge, is documenting what's happening, is bringing this to bear on these struggles. That it can entice scholars into work, even if there's not a lot of money, because it's an avenue for powerful meaning and significance. So many scholars are stranded at these institutions, which Ernesto Galarza warned were graveyards. Right. They're stranded in meaningless kind of work. And so if somebody from the Central Valley Partnership shows up with a look what's happening here in Fresno or in Visalia or someplace in the Central Valley, what's showing up is something that can give deep sense of purpose and significance and meaning to people who want to join in and be part of that. And that includes students, young students who are looking for meaningful ways to think about how they're going to spend their lives and their work.
Well, there's the paradox of much greater reach and ability to connect, but the interconnectedness of all of these different interests is also much more present in every decision that we make. So, Dan, and since we only have a couple of minutes left, let me ask this: what does the Central Valley Partnership look for in relationships with other organizations seeking to address the environment, social equity, and so forth? Who do you want to partner with?
I really quickly, Mitch, I want to go back and mention something that the last question is really important, but it was constructed not ideally. I think you see in the narrative over the book that the utility of campus-based scholarship diminishes.
Right.
It's marginal. And so, the title of the book is In the Struggle. We have a professor at Cornell that's a friend, that David Greenwood, who's critiqued positivist science in that the campus-based work can be viewed as conjecture or speculation in that it's so far from the actual problems. And who and what is a scholar is at play here. So me and Scott are constantly saying that scholars are not people with letters after our names. I think we both have those, and to be able to have this conversation with you from a certain position, we are both vested in actually empowering community members to do their own research. Mm-hmm. The Central Valley Partnership has a lot of premises that I've learned over the last 10 years of doing it. One is that seek common ground and put aside differences. It was originally formed as a blue-green coalition. And after 2016's election, we became much more intersectional and regional in scope, but Fresno basis. And with labor unions and environmental groups, historically, especially the building trades, do not get along. And so how are we going to forge alliances there? And internal to the movement, is an enormous amounts of tension, friction, and contradictions.
Sure.
Right now, we're going through the redistricting process, and you have multiple different racial groups positioning themselves. And we're making a claim. Just last Tuesday, we need interracial solidarity. Mm-hmm. The Central Valley Partnership is based upon deeply multiracial, intergenerational, and gender inclusive networking and trust building. And I think we have the emergence of a model here that can apply to other regions. So difference and diversity. And if you look at it in the agricultural system, I come from an Irish background. We were planting 4 varieties of potato that got a blight, and 2 million of us starved, 3 million immigrated, leaving 2 million alive, right? Mm-hmm. Monocultures are very systemically vulnerable. Same with human cultures. It's our diversity that is our solution here.
In terms of diversity and bringing people together, though, we often allow the perfect to be the enemy of the good. And a lot of these organizations are looking for their agenda, but not giving anything. How do we encourage that dialogue between the potential allies in that movement?
The simplest thing you have is your own position, to be humble and subordinate your own position. I've realized that we have more than 50% say in any relationship we have because we can subordinate our own position. Mm-hmm. And so just not firing back. There's a lot of trauma in the Central Valley of California. There is a lot of historic, this is a place where a form of feudalism is still operating. Oppression is present. There's wounds that crossfire within networks and relationships, personal ones, longstanding ones. And how to heal those. I spend so much more time I'm not being attacked by agribusiness right now. I am trying to marshal people to get along. I'm lucky I'm a Quaker, so that's the difficult work. It's us all getting along. Remember, in Barcelona in 1936, the fascists are coming in on them and everyone's fighting. There's a civil war in the middle of a war. This is the kind of problems. If we can nonviolently problem solve and build community, it'll be a natural flow to solving these bigger problems.
Well, that is exactly why I think your book is so useful. You're describing the larger environment in which we live right now. That conflict, that concern, the wounds that we're all experiencing are what are preventing us from taking those steps towards humility and collaboration. So I want to thank you both for taking time to talk with us today.
Our pleasure.
Thank you.
We've been talking with Daniel O'Connell and Scott Peters. Their book is In the Struggle, and that, of course, is available on Amazon at your favorite bookstore, and we encourage you to take the time to read it. Those stories of the 8 different researchers and how they forged communities generation by generation is important for us to think about as we look at the next 20, 30, and 50 years in the climate struggle. We're going to save this planet, but we have to do it by bringing ourselves back together. This is Earth911 Sustainability in Your Ear, and we're hoping that you will take a moment to share this with this podcast with your friends, your family. Let's get people talking. We'll be back soon with another interview, and in the meantime, I'm Mitch Ratcliffe, your host. Take care of yourself, take care of one another, and let's all take care of this beautiful planet of ours. Have a green day.